Let's talk all about AI in business. It's hosted by Brent Muller. Welcome to the Future Proof Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Future Proof, the podcast where we're decoding how founders, leaders, and execs are reshaping industries across the board using emerging tech like AI, data, and automation. And so if you're looking to future-proof your business, you're definitely in the right place. And before we jump into today's episode and introduce our guest, anybody that is looking to just understand where to start with AI and just want to have a 15-minute conversation with us, there's a link in the show notes. Just hop on a call with us. We're happy to talk. We don't pitch. We're here to help. Anyway, let's jump into today's episode. I'm really excited to have Brent Williams from Benekiva. Brent, thanks for joining. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump right in. So we always start with the founders and the leaders' journey. So tell us about your background leading up to starting Benekiva.
Well, prior to Benekiva, I owned my own financial advisory firm and had a substantial firm there. And when you have a large firm like the one I have, you go through multiple carriers, claims, and servicing processes. And on one hand, I'm constantly apologizing for an archaic process to which I have no control over. While on the other hand, I'm trying to serve, maintain, and gain clients. And so, interestingly enough, when I had the idea for Benekiva, I thought, well, there has to be a digital solution out there that just digitizes the claims and servicing new business processes. And I thought, well, I'll just buy the solution. I'll offer it to my clients and beneficiaries as a differentiator of doing business with our firm versus anyone else's firm. Long story short, I couldn't find the solution. So it sent me down this 3.5-year research path, where I literally called the carriers that I did business with, and I'd ask them, I'd say, hey, my name is Brent Williams, look at my book of business. And they'd say, how can I help you, Mr. Williams? And I said,
nice to have that, right? A little cachet to help.
I want to come visit the claims department. And interestingly enough, they thought, well, if they could showcase to our firm that they process claims quickly and efficiently, that we would drive more business there, which was a correct assumption. But the real reason I was looking to do that is to identify and understand, why was this process so broken? And so essentially, for 3.5 years, multiple carriers, multiple claim staff and servicing staff basically identified the root cause of a lot of the problems on claims and servicing, and then decided that we needed to put together a team and build out the solution.
Unbelievable. And so you sought to do that, and that when did you roll? You rolled out in 2019, I think?
Yeah, so we went live with our first carrier client in December of 2018, and then brought the product to the overall market in 2019. And we quickly grew from one carrier to 3 to 6 to 9. Now we work with about 20 carriers, or 20 plus carriers now, because we just landed 2 more.
It's kind of nice to have that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I finally have the organization to where I'm not involved in everything. So, for example, the last 3 clients that we gained, actually the last 4 clients that we've gained, I wasn't involved in the process one bit, with the exception I had to sign the contract.
That's okay.
We got a great team and wonderful people on the team, and you know, when you put good people on the team and you just get out of their way, they'll execute.
Amen. I love it. So tell me about your vision for Benekiva and kind of how you see this thing grow.
Yeah. When I built Benekiva, I said, you know, we don't want to be just another claims and servicing administration system. We want to be the claims and servicing administration system. So in order to do that, we have to make sure that we're not becoming legacy technology ourselves. So when we built Benekiva, we really built it on a couple of main mantras. One, anywhere, anytime, any device operation for all parties involved. Right? That means it's
that's no easy feat, by the way.
Yeah, it's cloud-based. We're not doing on-prem, and it's a secure platform. You know, we've got use cases of carrier claim stack processing death claims at 10:38 p.m. at night using their company iPhones, right? No other solution in the world puts carriers in that type of flexibility. And the second thing is we said we need to make sure that we're a truly scalable technology, which when you ask a lot of technology companies, are they a scalable solution? All of them will say, yeah.
Oh, I always say, yeah, it's the standard answer, right?
Then when you follow up that question and say, of all your clients, how many of them have custom code? And then all of a sudden you get blah, 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 blah.
Right.
In order to be truly scalable, 0 lines of custom code. That's a truly scalable technology. And so we've adhered to that, and it's worked out great for us and our clients. It allows us to serve tier 1 clients all the way down to tier 5 clients.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so I would imagine the market is your addressable market is massive,
Yeah.
right? And so you're 20 some carriers now. How many carriers do you think you can add over the next 3-5 years?
Probably, I mean, now with the team that we have in place, I would say another 20 or maybe even 30 in the next 3 to 5 years to be.
That's fantastic because they're not, like you said, the tier ones are completely different animal than the tier fives, right? Yeah.
And the tier 1s are almost like multiple carriers in one, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to sell each segment or each silo inside the organization. But the nice thing is once you're through their process and they're already a client, that just
Right.
helps you kind of ease right through that process.
Yeah. And I've experienced that on the consulting side and with some big companies. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And anybody else that done with those size companies know that's exactly the hardest part is that first one.
Yeah.
What do we used to call it in consulting? Land and expand. I mean, it's just kind of the way it works, right? And they know it too. So that's great. I love it. So tell me about how you see the industry, because it's obviously evolving, right? And you've brought really cool technology to solve a specific use case. But as we were talking about before, this is not a quick adopting, emerging tech. So, but even before we get into emerging tech, how do you see the landscape changing and where do you see this going?
Yeah. I think the landscape, it's interesting. We've always said in the insurance industry that, the insurance industry is typically 5 to 8 years behind the banking industry. Banking industry is just typically 5 to 8 years behind the financial sector industry.
Yes.
And then you look at the life, annuity, and health side of the industry, and that's 5 to 8 years behind the P&C side of the industry. So, we've got there's carriers out there that are still processing claims via fax machine. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we've got technologies out there that are still being used that, green screens and arrow this, function F1 that. And, you think about that trying to hire staff. You take someone who just got out of college and put them in front of a green screen and tell them arrow this, function F that.
They think they did a time warp, right?
They're up by the end of the day. I mean, so I think the specifically on the life, annuity, and health side of the industry, we finally got to that tipping point where it's no longer an option to update technology. It's a necessity.
Yeah.
I think we're finally to that point.
That's good. Because I think that's when innovation starts to happen. And you guys have done some really, really cool stuff. So before we jump into the emerging tech, do you see the insurance industry in general, like we talked about, like the rate of change is tough, right? But do you see one or two places where you really see that impact, where that things could change over the next few years? Because I you know what, Brent, the one thing I always say on this podcast, we used to do 5-year outlooks. You can't do that anymore, right? 2 years max, because things just change so fast. Yeah. And I'm just wondering how an industry like insurance reacts to that rate of change.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that most of them are realizing they can't. I mean, they're not even prepared to act that fast. So I think it's almost to a situation where you're going to have to bring on some type of partner to even get you ready to leverage some of these technologies. We built our own proprietary data configurator and innovation gateway that allows us to connect to multiple systems, including those green screens, very quickly. The unintended consequence of that is that platform can be sold all by itself to get carriers more ready to be able to leverage some of these tools.
Yeah, like a foundational step, right? Yeah. And it's funny, Brent, you and I are going to have to talk about that, because that has come up on my interviews multiple times in multiple industries. What's the saying that I had a guy the other day told me, great. He goes, my clients tell me we're data rich and information poor, meaning none of their data talks to each other. They can't get to it.
Exactly.
So they're like, we have all this data, right, that would help us if we could just figure out how to get it all together and make sense of it, right? That thing that you built, the data configurator, is probably going to be a very sought after thing. So For anybody watching the podcast, we'll make sure that Brent starts to put some of those links when we go live about how to learn more about that. Yeah. So Brent, tell me about emerging tech, because this is where I think and you tell me what you think, but I tell everybody, and we talked a little bit before the podcast about blockchain, but blockchain got a lot of hype,
Yep.
but it kind of died on the vine. Cloud to me was cloud and mobile were the last two big game changers, but you didn't have to jump in immediately,
Yep.
right? I feel like AI is different. And forget the hype cycle, right? And we'll talk about use cases as we go forward. But I feel like AI is something that you just can't ignore. I don't care what industry you're in. It's just how you go about it is really the most difficult thing. So what is your take here?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned blockchain because, that was the big thing in the insurance industry we were talking about 6-7 years ago. It was going to change the industry. And my answer back then is the same as my answer today. I don't believe any technology is going to automatically just disrupt or change an industry. I think it's about finding the specific use cases where the technology can add value. Test those use cases. If it adds value, great, do more use cases. If it doesn't, move on to another technology. With AI, what we found is the use cases we test, it's providing phenomenal value. So guess what?
Right. Do more of it.
I use my own advice, right? Do more, do more. Right? What's the next use case we can do? So we've proven it internally. We work in an industry where it's very slow to adopt. There's rules and regulations. So, there's going to be a lot of carriers that are not even ready to take on some of these tools. And like I mentioned before, just from a data perspective, they're not even prepared to. So they're going to need some type of tool to at least get them prepared to even test some of these use cases. But then there are some carriers that want to try some of these new use cases, and they're going to do some internal testing with AI tools and things. And it's interesting. I was on a panel discussion here a couple weeks ago, and they asked the question about AI replacing humans. And I said, I think we're a long ways from AI replacing humans, but
yes, we are.
We have this concept at Benekiva called Humanimation, and that's where you use these tools to enable the human. And what I said on that panel was, I don't believe you need to be worried about AI taking your job. What I think you need to be worrying about is a human who leverages the AI tools taking your job. That is absolutely going to happen.
100%. So we coined this term, and now I always give Alexander DeRitter the credit for this, but now I'm stealing it as my own. But we call them digital coworkers.
Yeah.
We feel like if you have a good employee and you teach that employee, him or her, how to use AI and leverage it and train them on it, they become 3, 5, 10x more productive and better because they know how to use it and leverage it. So to your point, exactly, Brent, that's what, if you're an employee that ignores it, you're at risk with someone who could come in and use it and just be that much more productive and successful at their job.
Absolutely. And we saw an interesting thing we saw here at Benekiva was, the first department that we actually started leveraging AI was in our development department. And there were a lot of developers who don't like, they're just old school. They want to code from line 1 to line 1,000,000, right? And the reality is these tools are so good that you don't have to code 1 to 1,000,000.
Right.
Let the tool code a majority of it for you, and then you just go and massage it from there.
Yes.
We have developers now. Well, first of all, we don't hire any developers anymore that don't leverage or understand or can build AI tools. It's just you have to be leveraging these.
I love that. It's a great mantra.
And we're of the mindset where I would rather have one developer who leverages these tools that does the work of 3 or 5 developers as opposed to go hire 3 or 5 more developers.
Right.
Our mantra here is we're a software company, right? We want to get as lean and mean as we can get. And these tools help us and allow us to do that.
Well, and not only that, they have to cut down on bugs and increase quality, right? The metrics have to be right because humans can make mistakes, even, not realizing it. Mm-hmm. And, that's where Copilot came from. That's the whole thought of it is have a developer right next to you is the AI, and AI is your co-pilot, and it helps you go faster, but also work smarter and with higher quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about some basic things, right? When Grammarly came, right? Everyone
Yeah.
writes emails and, blogs, things like that.
Right.
But Grammarly comes out and all of a sudden it shows you every mistake that you're making. And I felt like I was a pretty good writer until I got Grammarly and I'm like, holy crap, I can't write worth of crap.
Right. No kidding. Right. No kidding.
Developing is no different. It's you're writing in a language. And so I just can't imagine how those tools are not helping developers. So it's definitely changed our business for sure.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And so how do you see it? I know we talked a little bit about it, but do you have interaction? I know you guys are a software company, but you also, you were in the business, you know the ins and outs, you probably have great relationships with your carriers. Do you see their challenges? Do you guys kind of try to help them navigate those challenges? Because again, you're playing in the claims and policies, right? But you also know that you wind up having discussions with that. Do you see that, or do you see that as an opportunity, or is it something you steer clear?
Yeah. No, we actually see it as an opportunity. As long as we stay heading toward the North Star, you can veer off course a little bit as long as you're not doing a 180 turn, right? And I tell the team it's don't chase shiny objects, but there are some shiny objects that make sense to our core business, So
Absolutely.
when we first came out, we were claims and then we quickly got into servicing. Well, we got into servicing because we had a carrier that was using our platform for claims. And they said, you know what, we can use the same platform to do our beneficiary changes, our address changes, withdrawal process, all of these things. And we said, yeah, that's a great use case for the technology. So, we configure the platform for those items. We give it back to the carrier and the carrier says, yeah, this works. Well, all of a sudden now we're claims and services. Right. And then I've always had this idea, at least on the life side or the death claims side. And this idea came from my advisory firm, where this idea of retention of assets. Every single time I was involved in the death claim process, a few things occurred. One, we replace a deceased client with a new client.
Yeah.
We replace a terminated life insurance policy with a new life insurance policy because I don't have to explain features of benefits. The beneficiary just felt it, right?
Yeah. Right.
I always got this question: what do I do with the money? What do I do with the excess funds? Right? And it's interesting because that's a new financial plan for this beneficiary. However, every single time I went through that process, I would sell the beneficiary products and services that the carrier sells that we just got the money from. But I was told not to use that carrier because of their claim process.
Wow.
Right? So think about that for a second. The claim process is literally where the promise is kept. And if you don't provide that Amazon type claims experience, you have no chance of retaining those assets. Zero. Right?
Yeah.
Now, if you provide that Amazon type claims experience,
what a huge missed opportunity too.
I mean, in our industry, across the industry, for every death claim check that is sent out or money that's sent out, less than 3% of those assets come back into the carrier. Think about that.
That's crazy.
You've got insurance companies that send out $1 billion a year and less than 3% comes back in as new business. But you have a captive, someone to sell right there. But the problem is you can't send them through a crappy process and then turn around and ask to do business with them.
Right.
Right.
Wow. I've never, ever heard that or thought of that, but it makes total sense. And you know the old adage, right? It's 7 times more expensive to go get a new customer. And basically that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why not serve the ones that already want to do business with you if you send them through a better process?
Yes. Yes.
That was the whole
enter Benekiva.
That was the whole idea around Benekiva. It literally stemmed from my advisory firm.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. And see, these are the things, and this is what I love about doing the podcast, is we find such industry insights like that people just don't think about. And you're like, this problem's been sitting here forever and no one's solving it?
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's crazy. And so I would imagine, though, that now if I think about the insurance industry in general and the things that they do behind the scenes, such as claims and policies and the servicing, I can't imagine that Benekiva is not going to just wind up expanding your product line horizontally this way.
Yeah. Yeah, we absolutely already have. We've got some products coming out later this year that actually expand upon what we originally did, but it doesn't steer too far from the North Star, right? It's,
Yeah.
one thing I've always said in my previous businesses is focus on what you're good at and master that, right? When you do that, then you don't have to worry about what your competitors are doing and all those other things, right? When you're the best of the best, then everybody wants the best of the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And the business naturally comes from that because, anybody that has a good experience with a software product, a service, an experience of some sort with a business, they're going to tell as many people as they can about it. It's just natural, right? Because also the reverse is true, right? If they have a bad experience, right? Again, the whole policy thing that you talked about on the death beneficiary. Wow. So yeah, I can't imagine that, that when you tell that story to carriers, if they don't realize it themselves, that they're not like, hey, we got to fix this.
Yeah.
Right.
And nobody's perfect. We make mistakes, and I tell the team that the whole thing around that is we're human. I mean, own it, take it in, own it,
Yeah.
fix it,
Be honest about it.
put policies and procedures in place so that mistake doesn't happen again, and move on. I mean, that's
Yeah.
all you can do. And we've done that, and some of our earlier implementations, we had some road bumps. We had, we had some speed bumps, and we learned a lot. We made changes, and now we're better for it.
Awesome. Before I get into my last question, tell me, what are you most excited about with Benekiva? Like, as you look down the next year to two, right? What are you the most excited about?
Well, year to two, I think it is leveraging more AI in some of the processes, of some of the internal tools, and even some tools for our carriers. We've built some really cool AI tools here that are just changing the game altogether. And it's really fun to watch. When you think about, I've said this before, and I may never see this in my lifetime, but I truly believe with rules, roles, data, verified data, and some of these tools, these AI tools, we could get to a point where a beneficiary or a policyholder doesn't even have to file a claim. Imagine that. An event happens and you get a text message from your carrier that says, hey, Brent, the money's going to be in your account in 48 hours.
Wow.
And I do that.
Yeah. Part of it will be figuring out what the trigger is, right? Because if you have to rely on municipalities and that kind of stuff on death certificates, that might be hard. But I totally get it. After that, if you can get the trigger to work, the rest of it, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things that, at the end of the day, one thing I learned about sitting with all those claim staff over that 3.5-year period, there's a misconception that, and maybe you can attest to this too. There's this misconception by the general consumers that truly believe that carriers don't want to pay claims.
Oh, most people believe that. Yeah.
I would argue that that's not the case. I mean, I've sat with hundreds of them, and they are very passionate about paying claims. However, they want to pay the right claims to the right people, and those are different problems, right?
Absolutely.
But, I take that back. I had one carrier that I spoke to, and they said, we would rather just have them process claims in a shoebox. And I was like, wow, this is not a company for Benekiva.
Yeah. Totally get it.
We'll move on.
Yeah. Totally. I would too. Yeah.
That close-minded that you don't even understand what you're promising to people.
Right.
We don't need to work with you.
Right. Yeah. Totally get it. Yeah. And it's kind of cool to be in that position, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. I tell the team all the time, that we are all part of a respectful industry. And if we get disrespected for dumb things, then there's times you got to fire clients.
Yep.
And
yeah,
there a lot of people aren't brave enough to do it. But like I said, this isn't my first rodeo. I've had a couple successful exits in the past, and I did the same thing in those businesses. The reality is we want to serve our carriers, and we want to be a partner of our carriers. I tell the team all the time, the moment we become a vendor to our carriers, we've lost.
Yeah.
We are not vendors. We are partners.
Yeah. I love that mantra. I've been using that my whole career, and I never want to be in the vendor spot. Yep. Right. And when I feel like I have that vibe on a sales call or something, it is immediate a no.
Yep.
Right. We are not, if we're not going to be partners, then, because again, I think if you help people, right, and help them solve a problem, it's your whole story is about that, right? And the business comes. And, to me, if you stay true to that, and again, for all the PE guys watching this, please don't take offense. There's some great PE firms out there, right? There really are. But there are also some that are just, they're numbers driven. And it's like, hey, how do I get to the sale within my time frame? And that's the part where I feel like when you're running the business that you're at odds with your backers. And I think that's the one area where I hope this kind of, this emerging tech helps kind of fix that a little bit, because I believe if you have a good product, a good solution, and you help people, all that stuff takes care of itself.
It absolutely does. As long as you're solving real problems and you've got, and I tell the team all the time, I mean, the team is what makes Benekiva. The people are what make Benekiva. It's not me. It's not an individual. It's the team. We've got a great team. Everyone does their fair share and it works. And as long as we continue down that path of doing what's best for the client at all times, and sometimes that means you got to swallow your pride. You got to say, hey, we messed up here. And you know what? We're going to give you a little kickback on your next SOW for it. I mean, it happens. It's
right.
Any and every business. You just got, it's not that you have those situations, it's how you react and take care of those situations that count.
Yep. As my wife always says, not what happens to you, it's how you handle it. And you're exactly right. Just do the right thing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, do the right thing.
100%.
All right. Last question, but always one of my favorites. If I could have you think about your business, Benekiva, Brent, tell me if there's one thing that you could use AI to do to fix, like the thing that would accelerate you or get you over a roadblock, whatever it is. What would you use AI to do?
Man, we're testing this theory right now. So we built a couple AI engines on the implementation side, and I've always had this thought that we should be able to get our implementations down to a relatively short period of time, because you look at all of our competitors and they're 12 to 36 month implementation timelines. We haven't had an implementation to get live in production, now not fully run. We have a crawl, walk, run methodology.
Yep.
They'll be live in production, but maybe not run live in production. But they're still live in production, getting value out of the platform. And typically that happens within 7 months. Now, we built some AI tools internally that our dev teams use, where these tools, we're testing it on a client right now, and we believe we'll do a full run implementation from signature on contract to processing run in production in 3 months or less.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. And that's where we can get to a point where we can go to our carriers and basically charge them the base platform fee and SaaS. And the platform fee includes up to 3 months of implementation.
Wow. Yeah. That's a game changer.
It is.
That's a full game changer. Yeah. It's so funny you say that, Brett. My last client that we were working with they did an implementation, and their implementations were somewhere between 6 and 18 weeks, right? Different healthcare technology company. Yep. But I'm sorry, there's no way it was done in 6. I'm sorry. It was longer than that. But anyway, long story short, it was a big gap.
Yeah.
And it was costing them significant revenue.
Yeah.
Right? Because they only had so many, because it took a full team to do each one. So they only had 3 teams.
Yeah.
Right? So you think about that, right? And even if you stagger them, you only have a certain amount of slots to do per year. But the demand was higher than the team capacity. And you start to think about that. If they could have that mentality of, how do I take an implementation that takes me this long and cut it down to this? How many more slots are there available to do that, right? And then you can scale from there.
Yeah.
It's just so full, because the cost comes down. It changes the whole business dimensions and the model.
It does, and it ultimately gets you down to that core leadership mentality that you don't want your good people doing low value work, right?
Amen to that.
The AI machines do the low value work, so your good people are doing the high value work. And that's how I look at it. I look at these tools as the AI is going to do the low value work. My developers, my head of product, my head of delivery, they're going to do the high value work.
Isn't that how outsourcing started years and years ago, right? It was BPO, right? What are our low value, monotonous stuff? How do we just ship that off, right? Right? It's the same thought process to start with. It'll evolve from there, but it's the same thought.
It is. It is. I literally just wrote an article around it, and I paralleled it to one of my previous businesses where I installed this efficiency process, and that was the whole goal of that. Have your high value work done by your high value people.
I couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. Brent, this has been really fun. We're definitely going to be watching Benekiva and see how you do, and we'll have you back in 6 or 9 months and just check in. We'd love to have you back.
That'd be awesome. We'll do it again.
Yeah. Well, guys, that wraps up this episode of Future Proof. And hey, you just got a whole deep dive into the insurance industry, which I love. And Brent, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Guys, we'll see you on the next episode.
If you're ready to embrace change and lead with innovation, be sure to subscribe and never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Future Proof Podcast.